Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Councillor Peter Candlish and I'm the Cabinet Member of Transport. Before we start today, I need to take everyone through some brief housekeeping information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts and assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. Everyone speaking on camera will be on camera, apart from those on my right. Please could everyone ensure that they speak directly into the microphone to ensure that the audio is clear and distinct on the live web stream. So we're going to get going with some introductions, and I'm going to ask everyone in the room to introduce themselves, including the people who are going to be making deputations, so I can work out who is who and where they are. I've introduced myself as Councillor Candlish. Councillor Bosher, could you start us off?
Councillor Simon Bosher, I'm the Conservative spokesman for Transport.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney, I'm the Labour Group spokesman for Transport.
Bethan Clements, Transport Delivery Manager.
Mike Thomas, Strategic EV Planner.
Richard Pemberton, Transport Strategy Team Leader.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport.
Gareth James, Transport Strategy Team Leader.
Sam Evans, and I live just off of Cockney Road.
I'm Min Wright, and I'm from a local bowls club on the proposed amendment to parking restrictions at Priory Crescent.
Denise Higginson, residing at 310 Queen's Road.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. And we all did very well with the switching the buttons on and off, apart from myself, for which I apologise. Okay, are there any apologies that we have received for today's meeting?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Strudwick and Councillor Madgwick.
Thank you. And finally, are there any declarations of interest that people need to put on the record? No, nothing on the record there. So we're going to come to the first item on our agenda. And my apologies to some people who will have to sit through some other items before we get to it, but there is an order and there was no obvious way of changing it around to benefit anything other, so I've left it as it is. So, Bethan, I believe you're going to give us a presentation or introduction on the report on electric vehicle on-street residential charge point scheme, number 3, I think.
Correct. I will keep it brief, as this is the third decision meeting we've brought this to. This is the TRO report rather than the EV scheme itself. The TROs being traffic regulation orders, which was undertaken as a public consultation for batch 3 earlier this year. It covers the following wards: Nelson, Charles Dickens, Fratton and St Thomas. I've previously outlined more detail around the EV TROs and the way in which things are undertaken, so I don't intend to go over that again for the purposes of this agenda. Happy to answer questions. So going straight into the content of the paper, we've obviously run a statutory consultation in June of this year and received across 52 proposed locations a total of 92 responses or representations by 83 people. There were some duplications in the number of responses we had. These were received to the formal TRO consultation. The predominant response was in objection, but typically linked to concerns over parking rather than opposition in principle to EV charge points. 12% of the responses were in support of the proposals. All of the responses received within the consultation period is contained within the report in Appendix C, which is a very lengthy report, but all the information is there, including all responses received. As a result of the consultation and working through the objections and those in support, it's recommended that the Cabinet Member for Transport approves the implementation of EV charging bays as advertised in Batch 3, TRO, reference PO4424, with the exception of the following sites, and these are outlined in Recommendation 2.2, Island View Terrace, Strode Road, St David's Road, Shakespeare Road and Balliol Road. And then I'll open the floor for questions.
Any questions? So, Councillor Bosher, you are a far better person in the chair than I am about these things. I have Denise Higginson down on the list to give a deputation. Thank you very much, and my apologies.
Hi, I'm here to object to the proposed EV charging point. The specific one that will be placed outside my property of 310 Queen's Road. My partner and I were quite surprised to find a notice that an EV space will be placed outside our property, considering we have not got an EV vehicle, and considering the amount of EV vehicles that are actually on our road. There is only generally one. So we were quite surprised to find this. I did email the address on the notice to object to this particular space being put in front of my property for a number of reasons. My first question would be is why outside my specific property? We have a number of other options as to where the EV space can go without disrupting an already pressured parking area. So we have opposite the council flats on the corner of Queen's Road, and there is also the free kind of spaces opposite my property to where the nursing home is, which does not affect anyone specifically. And there is also as well the corner of Percival Road, where also the space would not be affecting anyone outside their property. I have walked around the immediate area from the Copner End side of Chichester Road, walked all the way down and made a sort of U-turn and come down Powerscourt Road and discovered that there are 7 new EV spaces. They are in roads Bosham, Funtington, Westbourne, Bedhampton, Preston, Paulsgrove and Wallace Road. All these EV spaces are on the corners of the roads and not actually outside anybody's front door. Hence why we are wondering why our house is being sort of targeted for that. We understand that outside property 305 Chichester Road, there was an EV charging point. And to our understanding, this charging point was removed due to it being a hazard to the public. Once again, we're wondering why our house specifically for this charging point. The charging points, the new charging points that have been put in place, they are all on the side roads. So there's 3 miles, there's Chichester Road, Powerscourt Road and Queen's Road, but there are very little EV spaces on those roads. They are all on the side roads, on the corners. So me and my partner obviously bought our property about 4 years ago, and we had only planned really to stay here for about 5 years, and we were going to move on to bigger and better. That was the plan, but we decided to actually make this particular house our permanent family home. We have 2 toddlers, and I'm due a newborn imminently, hopefully not today. This has changed. Our decision has changed since discovering this particular EV space. I'm concerned over the safety of the EV charging points and of the vehicles themselves. The concerns are fire hazards. 243 EV spontaneously caught fire in 2024. The lithium batteries burn so hot that it can actually take the fire brigade on average 2 hours to put out. They do cause damage to the surrounding areas, and we're not too far away from, or our property is not too far away from these vehicles. So my concern would obviously be my house would actually catch fire as well. Our other concern would be as well myself trying to juggle a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old and a newborn to our vehicle, which could be parked anywhere along that road. But if obviously there is a space outside the property, it would make life for myself a lot easier, and obviously the safety of my children as well. So if this particular space is approved, can I ask what safety measures will be put in place to ensure that, obviously, if a fire did occur, what safety measures will be in place for my property? As I've said before, obviously 3 very young children. I've been thinking about trying to plan an escape from my house with my 3 children, if anything like that were to happen. It does say in your notice of meeting, agenda item 3.5, the location proposed are based on residents' requests for an on-street EV charging point. We specifically have not requested this, and we have no intention of purchasing an EV. And unfortunately, purchasing such a luxurious vehicle is just not for us at this time. So may I suggest that the incentive, seeing as the government are quite pushy on these EV vehicles, that the people who do purchase them have the charging points outside the house, so we treat it more as like a disabled bay. So once they have parked obviously their vehicle and they've charged it, instead of removing it from that charging point, trying to find another space, which causes more pressure on the parking, they can just leave it where it is, and then it would be that everybody would be generally happy. Yes. Yes, and as you said before, there were 83 rejections on the proposed charging points. So I'm here to just support that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question there? Because something's come up as a result of this. I mean, I'm looking at the report. When you look on page 10, large page 10, the description of, I should get closer now, the description says P3 FRA 240308 Queens Road, lamp column number 35. It says 308. And when I heard the lady say 310, I thought, oh, that's a bit odd. When I go back to page 26, it actually says Queens Road, south side from the extended common boundary of numbers 308 and 310 Queens Road for distance 6 metres. Now, I don't physically have a picture in my mind of what that is. I mean, I know where Queens Road is, I know what it's like, but I don't feel that. So I'm a bit curious about the discrepancy between the description in one part of the report and there. So is it outside 310 or is it outside 308? So it's large page 10 and large page 26 is where I saw that. And it's only because of what the lady said that I picked that up.
So I think we're just trying to get an exact spot, and I think there'll be several issues we'll come back to respond to your deputation. And if we need a bit of time to do that.
We do. But would you like me to respond to the safety
I was going to
concerns?
say, I think there are some general points that perhaps you could start with while we're looking into the specifics of the site.
Yeah, if you, okay. So under current fire safety regulations, the EV charge points that are being installed are not classed as a fire hazard when they're installed in accordance with relevant standards. So our charge point operator is Zest, All Zest EV charger installations comply with UK building regulations and industry standards. These are HSE CDM regulations, including BS, oh gosh, there's a really long number now. More than happy to provide this by email, including BS 7671 2018 plus A2 2022. All necessary safety certifications are in place with the charge point operator. Fire safety considerations were integral to the design and placement of the equipment. Zest installations comply with BS 7671, the IET wiring regulations, and the IET Code of Practice for EV charging equipment installations, which aim to ensure electrical safety and protection against overheating and faults. Compliance with the above standards is deemed to make installations safe, hence no additional national legislation on distance or fire safety exists. To reassure you, in practice, there are many thousands of EV chargers safely installed on domestic properties themselves across the UK. They're often mounted on external walls and garages. In the case of the proposed charge point adjacent to your property, it will be powered by a street lamp column, yeah. Is that correct? Which is supplied with lower voltage electricity, below 5 kilowatts. You therefore have a live electrical appliance installed and operational outside of your property, which presents minimal risk, drawing power from and the proposed charge point would draw power from the existing lamp column. In terms of why this location was proposed outside of your property, I'm going to pass to my colleague Mike.
But before you do, could you just, because there are also people who will be watching this at home, can you just briefly talk through the sort of criteria in which guide a location generally, and what the limitations and possibilities of that are?
Yeah, so there were three key factors on all locations considered. So we came out to the public, we asked, are you interested, or do you have an EV that you want to charge from home and do not have off-street charging facilities? So every single one of these sites is at or near to someone's property who can't charge on their own property. One of the other issues we had was to ensure we could retain as much on-street parking as possible. We tried to get it at the ends of roads and ends of bays rather than centre bays, because if you split a bay, it's much less efficient than just sort of chipping a bit off the end, if that makes sense. And the other thing, it has to be very near to a lamp column, because otherwise we're digging up a very large amount of pavement just to put a charging bollard in. So those are the three key things: that it is near the requester's property, it is near to a lamp column, and where we are trying to save as much on-street parking for most who can't park in EVs while they're charging, which also will include EVs when they're not charging, if that makes sense. So we're trying to keep as much capacity as possible. So it's just one of those challenging scenarios to get everything in we'd like to.
And are we in a position to say anything about the specific location at this moment, or should I take some questions and come back?
I think if you could come back to that,
okay.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
So, any questions? Councillor Bosher.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I think the deputation was actually referring to EV vehicle fires and not charging points, but thanks for the British Standard reference numbers. The thing I want to pick up on, and I think it's actually been one that's been taken out, but I'll question it anyway. The comment was made, they're usually put in places where people request them. Now, one of these has actually come out for a disabled-based sort of application, but looking at some of the objections to it, and I don't read all of them, I tend to go to the ones where there seems to be the most objections, because there's obviously a case there. That one, at least 2 or 3 people have been up and down the road and said, absolutely nobody here has got an electric vehicle or actually wants one, which begs the question, why was it considered in the first place? And that's what I'd be interested to know in that respect, because perhaps I am a little bit cynical as to where these requests actually come from on occasions, and whether we actually follow through once we're getting to this stage to see whether there is still an appetite there, or whether the person that has requested an EV charging point actually no longer lives at that property anymore, in which case that request by default goes when the person leaves the property. But I'll leave it at that point for the moment, just out of interest.
one of the points is, whilst someone may have requested a space, they may well have not responded to the consultation. So we've only got the people generally who object or make representation, although we do have some message of support. So the person may still be there. They just may think, oh, they're advertising it, I don't need to respond. The other point is we are going to need more EV chargers, and it's an ongoing process.
Can I, just to respond to your other point, just quickly in relation to the deputisation was asking about EV vehicles themselves. I'm not going to quote you chapter and verse of this, but there is a document that was published in January of this year by the Energy Saving Trust, which is titled Are Electric Vehicles a Fire Risk? And it is subtitled A Summary of Current Research and Data. So it might be something worth having a look at as well. It's very current, earlier this year.
Councillor Bosher?
Well, as I said, I think I've said it before, I've got an electric vehicle anyway, and I'm lucky that I've got a home charger installed, but it's something that I pay a lot of attention to anyway, and I think you find that the big fire that they had at Stansted Airport, which destroyed an entire load of vehicles in a multi-storey car park, was actually caused by an EV. It was a Range Rover. So, you know, there is always going to be a fire risk, but I appreciate it's nothing to do, arguably, with us and the installation points, provided they're done correctly. It's more about the vehicle in that respect. I'd like to pick up on the point that was made, and it's probably the word maybe that threw me in the answer that I got. You know, do we actually physically... I appreciate that some people, if they want the charging point, and some people have actually supported them, if you look at that, so I'm guessing they're the people that are supporting it. But where we have nobody supporting it and we have significant objections to it, do we actually go back and check to see whether the original request is still a live request? Because words like maybe, this could have been somebody from 2 or 3 years ago that requested it, and they subsequently moved or died or whatever reason, and I'd like to think that we actually physically do go back and check that it's actually still required, rather than use words like maybe in the middle of it.
I think I will speak to answer a little bit here, because I think it's a broader question. I think there is a deliberate use of words like usually or typically in the report, because actually there are many factors behind the choice about where something goes and what is being tried to achieve. So it is true, I believe, and because I've seen the original things that have come in, that the initial locations of chargers in the first set of schemes that came through were very closely tied to individual people. The new locations that have been requested are largely driven by those, but not entirely, because the scheme has moved to a different phase. It's no longer a very pioneer in a very small number of places. This is a government grant to basically put in place a first cut initial set of citywide EV chargers, specifically targeting on-street residential areas where few people have access to private driveways. So whether or not, in fact, the original claim is still there, it obviously was a reason for selecting it in the first place, but it's not the only factor, and you have to look at it with more than just that one eye upon it in terms of coming to it. So I think that to me is why they have to use words like usually or typically in the report. It is not the case that someone requests a EV charge point and one is built outside their house. Certainly not any longer.
If that is the case now, that we are now looking at a citywide rollout, as you just suggested, albeit for on-street, because that's what we're talking about, then I think we ought to be losing where people have specifically requested it, because from inference from what you're saying is we're now looking at places where potentially they have not been requested, which was probably the case with one of those roads. And so I think the narrative in these reports needs to change, because it's always been where an EV has been requested. The other thing that the deputy pointed out and forgive me, but there was she listed half a dozen sites in the near vicinity where there are already electric vehicle charging points, which are all quite close to that sort of Queen's Road area, all on various junctions. Is there a demand for extra? Because there's not only this one, there's another one that's listed to go into Queen's Road. Is it something about the Queen's Road area where everybody wants electric vehicles, or is this something of a wider strategy that we're talking about? And it also begs the question, why isn't this being considered on a junction somewhere as opposed to directly in an area where perhaps there isn't an appetite for it?
I think there are two issues that you're raising there. One is kind of the where are they being put in, and then the second is about the specific location here. So on the broader sense, I think it is clear we're in a transition moment. So we've moved from the point where it was a pioneer scheme reliant on early adopters, and it was really quite closely targeted to them. People weren't quite, but were more or less getting a charger put very close to where they wanted it to. However, the penetration of electric vehicles at the moment is only about 1 in 25, and although it's expected to get to 1 in 7 by 2030, that upsurge has not yet come. It is expected to come. The forecasts are, the government is planning and advising on, that it is coming because the price of EVs is coming down all the time, more people are switching over to it. So there is both an element of trying to put it close to where there is some known demand to ensure that we're not just putting in installations which would then become empty. And it's also the opportunity for the city, just in the same way it put in gas lines or street lamps, to put in a city-wide programme that gets to more places. Now, my expectation is, if the truth of the forecast holds, and we end up with 1 in 7 vehicles in the city being electric by 2030, there will be an awful lot more charge points come in that will come in through subsequent schemes, and already there are funds and budgets being spoken about from the government to help achieve that. Although I think the next one is perhaps more focused on some of the non-street locations that people often cite in, I think in fact one was mentioned in the deputation. These are good places to put electric vehicle chargers, but this lump of money is specifically, as the name in the title says, on-street residential areas. It's actually targeted at, in some ways, the hardest areas to be putting in these things, because these are areas which have, we all know, a huge parking demand at the moment. Are we back to anything more about the specifics of this location?
Yes, certainly can do. So this is as near as we can get sensibly to the requester's location. Again, it has to be near the lamp column. This is the second lamp column up the road, if that makes sense. But the first lamp column is within double yellow line, so we couldn't put it there. So it fits the criteria. It's as close to the end of the road as we can get, whilst having it near to a column and near to a resident's property. But obviously, if the resident doesn't live with the property that's outside the lamp column where we're putting it, it may not always be immediately outside of the requester's property, because it just doesn't work out like that.
And that is certainly something we are never going to promise, is to put a charger out somewhere. Some people will actually wish it to be outside their property, and we're definitely not going to make that promise either. Okay, any more questions? Councillor Bosher.
Which sort of begs the question, have you been back and checked to see whether the requester still wants it? Do we do that as a matter of course? When did the request actually come in?
We haven't done, but it's a very aggressive programme which set out with funding that's going, and also the traffic regulation order process is very stipulated and like this. So it's incredibly resource intensive, and if we then change it to someone else, then we have to then do that process again. So it's just an iterative process of people moving and then us changing it. Where we clearly had, you'll see one of the recommendations is to remove a locations where we have had significant confirmation of that, we have actually acted.
Bethan, you want to say something more, and then I'm going to move as...
Only for the matter of the minutes that Councillor Heaney was talking about Queen's Road, but the lady making the deputisation, I think, was Chichester Road, just to draw that distinction between the two. Is that... Your query, Councillor Heaney, around the description in the document was the different.
My query was around what the report says. There are two references I can see in the report on page 10, large figure page 10, where it says, where are we? P3 FRA 2A240 308 Queens Road, lamp column number 35. And then on page 26,
I think
on the second Queens Road, it says south side from the extended common boundary of numbers 308 and 310 Queens Road for a distance of 6 metres in a leisurely direction. So it suggests that it's sort of straddles the two. And I wasn't
but I
quite
think the
clear.
question that Bethan has introduced, I think it was Queens, wasn't it, that we were talking about? So
Queen.
There were two proposed there.
yeah. So
Yes.
the Chichester, I think, was a hearing by Bethan.
Right, okay.
Okay, so we've re-established that the deputation is relating to Queen, and we have gone through the issues both generally and some discussion about the specifics. Are there any more questions in respect of, from the two councillors present?
I haven't had a response to my question about the discrepancy between the two. Is it outside 308 or is it outside 3010?
I thought we'd had one. My apologies. What could we repeat what, or put on the record exactly where the location is? Although whilst they're looking back at that, I think the bit I heard was that it had been looked at in respect of double yellow lines. It wasn't possible to put it right on the corner. That in generally that we are putting it at the end of things where possible, but that isn't always possible. And
Sorry, just to comment, yeah. One is the technical description for the traffic regulation order itself, and the other is the description for the members of the public that makes it, I use the term, relatively easy for them to identify. The traffic regulation order just has to be that specific boundary of, whereas, you know, that makes it more difficult for someone to understand.
but for the purposes of kind of understanding and the resident here, where actually would it be?
Well, the notice placed on site did have a plan on it showing it as shown, and
Yeah.
hopefully the resident can confirm that, you know,
So-
that's where.
So I'm happy to accept that it is outside the resident's home or close enough to be impacting from that side. And we have a technical description for the TRO purposes specifying it clearly. Councillor Heaney, does that satisfy you?
No, okay. Is the lamp column outside 308? Because this is what the report says. The detail in the report says 308 Queens Road, lamp column number 35. So I assume, having read that, the lamp column is outside number 30. The lamp column 35 is outside 308. Well, because I obviously physically haven't, I mean, I only picked that up because of the deputation. I mean, I didn't actually read it, I mean, because there's, you know, this is a massive report, and I wouldn't necessarily have picked up the discrepancy until the lady made the point. And the point I keep trying to make is that there is a difference in different parts of the report about where this actually is.
The lamp column is between 308 and 310.
Right. And the
bay
bay
is proposed outside 310.
and the B will be made outside 310, not 308. Okay, well, it could have been made a bit clearer. We didn't all know where we were.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so as ever on these reports, there are several things informing the way we go about decisions, some of which we've spoken about. So this is the start of a new era for electric transport, electric vehicles in the city, and we are starting to put in the process of putting in infrastructure for the city. It is being done in a pragmatic way that is trying to locate them close to where there is known demand, but it is also very clearly going into places where it is expected that demand will be arising in the near future, because we only get so many opportunities to kind of put these things in. The second thing that was raised in the deputation was around safety. I think, to be honest, I will check the example cited by Councillor Bosher, because I thought it was actually one of those myths that actually it wasn't an electric vehicle. But whether it is or it isn't, there are now over a million electric vehicles on the road, and I'm very clear that there is not compelling evidence that they are particularly dangerous, and there have been charge points of the sort that have been that are being put in across the city now, which have been operating for some time with no significant danger. Nothing is absolute, because actually a car sitting outside someone's house is actually a metal box filled with inflammable petrol. But fundamentally, I am not minded to stop in any way the installation of the EV charge programme as we've got it. Broadly, therefore, I am happy to accept the report as has been put with the recommendations set. The most compelling argument I actually heard from the deputy, who I understand is personally not perhaps convinced by the argument, but I'm making a citywide kind of a call around this. The most compelling question I had was that she had looked at the density of charge points that are being proposed, and I am willing to take a second look at that, because there is a balance about how quickly we put these things in. So with the exception of that one charge point, which we will take a second look at, I am happy to take the report as it is with the recommendations put forward by the officers. And with and anyone who is watching this or comes across this through some other way, I would actually recommend they go through the report, because it actually addresses a lot of the other issues that people raise around the installation of the EV charge points, which relates to their issues potentially with parking, with enforcement of them, and so forth. So it's a long document. I don't want to go through it every time we have this session, because there will be another set that is coming through in a few weeks' time. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes item number 3, I think, on the agenda. I'd now like to move to item number 4, which is the Transport for South East, Transport Strategy for the South East, and I think that is going to be taken by Richard.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So I'll give a very quick overview of the paper and what it concerns. So the background, for those who may not be aware, Transport for the South East is something called a subnational transport body. There are 7 of them, covering the entirety of England. Some of them have got quite a high profile. Many people may have heard of Transport for the North, for example. Transport for the South East is the subnational transport body covering Kent, Sussex, Hampshire, Surrey, basically all the way from the eastern tip of the country over to the boundary with Dorset. And Portsmouth is therefore a member of TFSC. The purpose of subnational transport bodies, there's 3 key purposes set out in paragraph 3.1. One of the requirements from their funder, the Department for Transport, is to develop pan-regional approaches to transport, developing regional transport strategies. So back in 2023, TFSC adopted a new, back in 2020, TFSC adopted a new transport strategy for the South East, setting out the aspirations of all of its member authorities for improving the transport network and developing regional transport links across the South East. However, it was adopted basically in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It had been prepared for a pre-2020 environment. So originally, it was intended that this strategy would be updated every 5 years or so, but the view as of July 2023, the TFSC Partnership Board, their decision-making board, took the view that actually that update should be fast-tracked for a number of reasons, primarily that some aspects of transport and the network have changed, travel demand has changed, there's been some changes in government policy as well, which have come to the fore. The key reasons are set out in paragraph 3.6. As to why we should be concerned about what the TFSC strategy says, in the updated strategy. Number one, we are a member, obviously, of Transport for the South East. Portsmouth, whilst part of Portsmouth does reside on an island, we are not really an island. We have large amounts of travel going out beyond the city and indeed beyond Hampshire. We have a very active visitor economy. We have a naval base. We have some key national economic assets with lots of travel to and from London. So what happens if for transport at a regional scale and the future development of links between Portsmouth and the wider area is important to us as a city. Also, Transport for the South East, they're not a massive funder, but they have supported us in the development of plans and business cases for a number of schemes and studies in recent years, particularly around rail and public transport connectivity and interchanges. So it's important that their large-scale plan aligns with ours. So TFSE, they have their own officer body. They undertook a process to update the 2023 strategy, kind of detailed in paragraph 4.1. There's been quite a large refresh of evidence and data. Lots of work has gone into understanding the needs of harder to reach, harder to engage groups. PCC transport service officers, and from time to time members have been engaged in those processes. And ultimately, officers are satisfied that our transport priorities, as set out in our adopted Portsmouth Transport Strategy from 2021, have been taken account of in the draft which TFSE prepared. This was then consulted upon with the public from December 2024 through to March 2025, and that included a roadshow, and there was a session held at Southsea, so we've had some local opportunities for feedback. Not huge numbers of responses from Portsmouth residents, but the level of engagement from respondents in Portsmouth to that draft quite similar to some of our neighbouring cities elsewhere on the south coast. Overall, the consultation which TFSE undertook shows quite high levels of support for the overall draft strategy. 60% of the 811 responses that they received agreed or strongly agreed with the ambitions set out. 16% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And there are 5 missions set out in the draft strategy, which are expanded on a bit later in this report. Most of those have got very strong support from both organisations and individuals. We, PCC, submitted a response to that consultation, which was broadly complementary of the original draft, but we drew out that there are a few areas where we felt there could be a bit more focus. Particularly, we have well-known issues with air quality in parts of the city, and we felt that that should be drawn out more strongly. There have been some amendments to TFSE's final draft or final version of the strategy, which we're reasonably happy with. Those post-consultation changes are laid out in paragraph 7. So in terms of what the final document actually looks like, it's appended to the report. You can hopefully have read it at your leisure, but it sets out a vision for transport in 2050, which all of the authorities are willing to sign up to, around offering high quality of life and achieving high levels of sustainable net zero carbon growth, and developing a transport network which supports that and supports the economy and all the things which go with it. There are 5 key missions, areas of focus, if you will, which TFSE have said they will try to push their resource towards. One is around strategic connectivity, which is mostly around your mainline rail and motorway connections, which tend to be radial out from London, but there's also a particular focus on east-west links, which tend to be weaker at the moment. They're actually more in need of support. A resilience mission, which is quite relevant to us as a city with only 3 ways on or off. We know what happens when one of them has an issue. There are resilience issues all over the southeast, whether that's due to lack of alternative routes, bad weather and climate change, damaging infrastructure, aging infrastructure. We've got lots of structures, for example, on the highway network, which are 50 or 60 years old and are not in the best of condition. So there needs to be more focus on resource for improving resilience. Inclusion and integration, which is around increasing the affordability and the inclusivity of transport across the area. This is more relevant for some of the more rural areas, but there are parts even of Portsmouth where public transport or other methods of access are not as good as we would like them to be. So it identifies the areas where TFSC will seek government support to address those issues. Decarbonisation. Government has set a target nationally for net zero by 2050 across all aspects of society and industry, including transports. TFSC are reflecting their member authorities, all of which have assigned or declared similar aspirations. And then the final mission is around supporting sustainable growth, which is around trying to push government to support us in funding transport interventions which enable badly needed housing development, but in the right places where it works well in terms of connectivity and where it can help to create good and healthy communities rather than disconnected communities. So paragraph 9 provides quite a long rundown, ultimately, of the reasons why these missions correspond well with the objectives and policies within Portsmouth's adopted transport strategy. We have no significant issues. There's no significant divergences between what TFSC are seeking to achieve and what we're trying to achieve. I'm not going to dwell on all of the reasoning other than that it's set out here, and we can't see any reason for our Cabinet Member for Transport not to endorse this strategy, and endorsing it will hopefully support the productive relationship we've had to date with Transport for the South East, who have supported us a bit on some of our transport objectives and aspirations.
Any questions? Councillor Bosher.
I'm not going to object to this because it is what it is, but there are some curios in it that I'd like to get my brain around. Is this being part funded out of the Transforming Cities Fund? It's not, so it's not part of that?
No, it's nothing to do with Transforming Cities. TCF is it's direct funding from central government to various local transport authorities. It hasn't gone via Transport for the South East. Could you just remind me of who the organisations are within this geographically? Because I'm seeing that East Sussex is a member, because I think the chair is from East Sussex, and the whole of Hampshire. Do we go all the way down to Kent as well? Yes, so I'm not going to try and list all, I believe it's 14 authorities, but the chair is Councillor Keith Glazier. So we're talking Hampshire, East, West Sussex and Kent? Yes, amongst others. Surrey, Southampton, Bracknell Forest. Southampton's in Hampshire last time I looked. Southampton, it's attached to Hampshire, but it's its own unitary, just like us. Yeah. It's only because when I'm looking at 5.3, when you think about that geographical area, 811 responses, I would argue is a pretty pitiful one, and I can understand why you dressed the support up in percentages, but out of the whole of Portsmouth, we only had 36 responses to this. It's not great, is it, if you actually look at it from that point of view? The other thing, more of a comment than anything else, the South East Hampshire Rapid Transit Network, that's been going on since 2020, I think, and we're looking at having a study into what can be actually delivered on that.
why are we only looking at it now 5 years later? How many studies have we actually had on that aspect of it? And how much does it cost?
So firstly, on the consultation, I mean, ultimately, it is what it is. That consultation was organised, it was led by Transport for the South East. For what it's worth, via our communications team, we amplified some of their social media posts. We did try to buck up the number of responses within Portsmouth. So there has been an effort to support TFSC. I'd say that there are issues that sometimes when you're trying to consult on very big, very general things, it often doesn't get the level of response that very specific local schemes will get. So in terms of that number of responses, I don't know for certain, but it should be statistically significant. But I admit that it's at the same time not enormous for the population of the area. In terms of your second point about South East Hants Rapid Transit, so this is something which actually probably comes up in one of the later items as well. So it's a very long-term programme. Transport programmes and schemes can take decades to deliver. SEHRT is one of these. So the reason for the study, which is underway at the moment, elements of SEHRT have been delivered over the last decade. So the hard interchange is an element of it. Portsmouth Park and Ride, which was opened in, 2017, was an element of it. A3 bus lanes, which extend from the north of Portsdown Hill up to Waterlooville. The Eclipse Bus Rapid Transit, which was opened around 2012 and then extended with Transforming Cities Fund money, 2019-2020. Some of the bus priority schemes and other BSIP-funded schemes we're delivering at the moment, they all come together. It's like different pieces of a very big long-term jigsaw puzzle. But the ultimate aspiration, which is for very high-frequency bus services, achieving journey times which are very comparable to driving, it's not something which you achieve overnight. It needs a continued long-term development of infrastructure and funding to support the building of services. So the reality is there are things we could do elsewhere on the network. There are areas where buses get held up at the moment, where there may be opportunities to improve. The point of this study is to identify those areas and then prioritise them for future funding, probably towards the 2030s, ultimately. Does that help to articulate what the purpose of that study is?
So this produces a strategy, and who actually funds them? Because certainly the hard interchange and the park and ride were essentially funded largely by Portsmouth City Council for those aspects of it. Because one of the notes that I wrote down next to Director of Finance's comments, because he's quite rightly saying the draft financial transport strategy for the South East does not contain any specific proposals which commit PCC to expenditure or will impact on PCC's finances. But obviously if those schemes come forward, we're going to have to find the money for it. Now I'm playing devil's advocate here, and we're looking at local government reorganisation, and one of the figures that was chucked out at the last council meeting as being the potential impact would be that we could inherit a £33 million deficit to Greater Portsmouth's finances, which would suggest to me that some of these sorts of schemes might find themselves in financial jeopardy going forward. Now, if we can't afford it, this strategy sort of falls apart, does it not?
I will jump in there and largely support you. So firstly, of the 36 responses from Portsmouth, I am one of them. So really, we should possibly drop that statistical significance down a touch. It was a very small number, and to be truthful, I don't think it was very well communicated to the broader population. So I don't think we can honestly say, in the way that some other things have got a good feedback from the grassroots up, that this report has done. That said, on a top-down basis, these guys are gatekeepers to money, and my overall comment or feeling around this is it's not show me the money, this is how we can ask for the money. And we have to keep on asking for the money under whatever government and condition applies, because you're right, some of these schemes will have to be delivered through centrally delivered money. They're not going to be affordable through local Portsmouth City Council money or whatever successor organisation if the government succeeds in creating a larger mega council in the next little while. I think we also have to look at devolution coming down the track as well. So this will also impinge upon these. So the way I look at this whole report is that it is a worthy update spelling out some of the things we need to do. I was particularly pleased to see the emphasis on the rail connections with Southampton, which I'm sure this is not the first time that has been put into report. Probably it will not be the last, but we need to keep doing that until such time as we actually get the money to get a better connection by rail to Southampton, because it's kind of needed. It also had references to things like ferries, which are occasionally overlooked. So I think it is a worthy report, but I agree is probably not critical to the delivery of those schemes. It is an aid to enabling that to happen. Any more kind of questions or indeed comments? I think now we're moving into the comments section.
As I said, Chair, I mean, I'm not going to die on a ditch in this. I think it's an aspiration, it's a wish list to actually get what we want. I'm just looking to the future, particularly with local government reorganisation, and saying it's a laudable document. Are we actually going to be able to deliver it? And perhaps I've been there too long, because I'm of the opinion that probably not in a lot of instances with what we've actually got here. There was one other comment I was actually going to make. I'd just be interested to know, because, you know, when I mentioned the Southeast East Hampshire Rapid Transit, and we're going out to do another study on that in this financial year, is what's Portsmouth City Council's contribution financially to this, what's it called, transport strategy for the South East? Because I would imagine that there is a financial contribution that we're actually making to be a member of this.
We do make a contribution to transport for the South East overall, which I believe is about 20,000, is it, per year? We'd have to come back to you on the exact amount, but it's in that order. However, TFSC do provide a whole range of other things for that money. It's not just developing the transport strategy. They also have some regional modelling tools. They have data, which we use. They have a central pot of funding which pays for the scheme development. So this South East Hampshire Rapid Transit Next Step study is being entirely funded from Transport for the South East. We're not paying a penny for that, the same as some previous studies referenced in the document we also got for free. So I would say we do get value for the money we put in back out.
Okay, well, I think we've all had enough of that, because I think we're all agreeing it's a good document, it's a worthy document. It is aspirational and a restatement in some instances, as well as, you know, a more specific record of what's done or going to be done. And I'm happy to take it as such, and I expect we'll come back to some of those issues on a future time. So I'm accepting the report as is, and moving to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 5. Which is the proposed permit parking scheme in Fratton. And I have Gareth down to make the presentation, and then we will have the deputations. And deputies, please remind me if I don't call you at that moment in time.
Thank you. So yes, the purpose of the report is to consider feedback received and the recommendations following the formal consultation on the proposed residence parking zone, or RPZ, in the North Fratton area, referred to as the GD zone, for which the traffic order was advertised on the 17th of May 2025. I won't go through the report verbatim, but I'll just give some of the more key points from the background section, and then that will bring us to the recommendations. So an informal survey of residents in the North Fratton area was carried out in April 2024. Questionnaires were sent to 2,809 households. 764 responses were received, with 69% indicating support for an RPZ. A formal consultation was subsequently carried out from the 12th of May 2025 to the 7th of June 2025, so earlier this year. The RPZ was proposed to operate from 4 to 6 p.m. every day. That's consistent with the neighbouring GC RPZ, which was implemented in May 2025. The reason for that is that these operating hours and similar have been used in other zones and have successfully deterred long-stay vehicles that are not able to obtain a permit, reduced the number of commercial vehicles parking in residential areas, and controlled the number of permits per household, while also retaining freedom at other times for residents to have visitors without the need for a visitor permit. The hours of operation place restrictions at a time of day when many people are returning from work, so ensure more space is available at this key time. So that was the scheme that we took to the formal consultation, advertised through a traffic order, and we found that a strong majority, that's 67%, were in favour of an RPZ overall, which is consistent with what we'd learned from the April 2024 informal survey. So we had 121 responses to the traffic order, the notice of intent. 46 respondents fully supported the proposal as advertised. 35 respondents supported the proposal for an RPZ, but had objections or comments about the details of the scheme, particularly the duration, i.e. 2-hour restricted period, and the hours chosen from 4 to 6 p.m. And then finally, there were 40 respondents who objected to the scheme as a whole. As noted here, the council received similar objections to proposed RPZ operating hours in other areas, but once these schemes began operating, the benefits of the scheme were realised and concerns decreased accordingly. However, if significant feedback from residents were to be received once the scheme is well established and suggested that the hours needed to be changed, then the council's transport service would review this accordingly and consider a new traffic regulation order, TRO, to amend them. Some concerns were also raised about the likely impact of the cost of permits on household finances that are already under pressure, and there were suggestions that the main intention of the scheme is to make money. The permit charge of £30 for the first permit helps to cover the running costs of the scheme, and it hasn't been increased since 2015, even while running costs have increased significantly during that time. The higher permit charge for second and third vehicles supports policy C of the Portsmouth Transport Strategy, making parking easier in residential areas through encouraging fewer vehicles, supporting the overarching strategic objective of delivering cleaner air. So I think really that just brings us to the the recommendation, and then there's an accompanying second recommendation. So the recommendation is to approve the implementation of the proposed RPZ in the North Fratton area to introduce parking places for GD permit holders only from 4 to 6 p.m. And then recommendation 2.2 is to note that additional engagement is planned with businesses near the junction of New Road and Northgate Avenue to determine a proposal to introduce a time-limited parking place at that site, which would be subject to a separate TRO and statutory consultation. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Before we answer any more questions, I'd like to move to deputations, and I'm just going to take these names in the order that I have them in front of me. So, unless you have agreed amongst yourself a different order. In that case, I have Mrs. Sam Evans to speak first. And I have not set a particular time for speaking, but something in the order of 5 or 6 minutes. After that, I might be gently encouraging people to conclude.
You're okay, it won't take me long.
Thank you.
Under general principles of public law, the PCC have a duty to act fairly and proportionately, to act sensibly and reasonably with regard to residents that are against this parking permit. I am well aware Portsea Island is densely populated, and what does not help is the amount of Visu taxis and HMOs. Clearly, that's another debate. The residents of Portsmouth, according to social media, believe that PCC are trying to implement parking permits to gather more revenue, as said. I would be interested to know how many of you in the council actually live on Portsea Island in parking permits. Which leads me to social care. Bear with me, this is relevant. We all know that the government, all parties, have not put enough funds into social care. It's failing miserably. I know this because I've worked in social care for over 30 years, and every government for the last 30 years have let it go to the point it's seriously underfunded. Social carers are paid a minimum wage. Not good, is it? These are the same carers who supported your loved ones through the turmoil of COVID, even threatened with the sack for refusing to work and refusing to be vaccinated. Guess that's helpful. All on the minimum wage, still on the minimum wage. And did you know that those carers who drive to support the vulnerable and dying in their own homes, because we don't have enough good affordable care homes in Portsmouth, these same drivers have to pay for an essential parking permits out of their own pocket? Disgraceful, isn't it? Wouldn't you agree, or would you disagree? So my question to you is, those poorly paid workers, will they be exempt from these restrictions and not having the correct GD zone permit? Because a lot of my carers work nights and wakes, which means they will get a parking ticket. Who's going to pay for that? Clearly not the company they work for. Oh yes, it will be the carer on the minimum wage who is looking after the vulnerable and dying. Nice one. These same carers do take a break for social inclusion. You know, these very vulnerable people on their own all day, not seeing their family much because they're working 2 or 3 jobs maybe, working hard, pay their taxes. Are they going to get a parking ticket? Engineers, who are an integral part of our society and for those on call, this workforce do not own their vans. And are you aware that this workforce cannot be insured for their own work tools inside a work van? So they have to take them out. Obviously, it's not possible to take them all out, as some tools are large and heavy. According to the government, introducing parking permits are designed to enable people to assess the community and carry on their business as easily as possible. It seems PCC want to do the opposite of this. When I challenged PCC when they started this consultation for Fratton South many years ago, the hoops that companies have to jump through to ensure their engineers are near their home so they can take their tools out of the van, because breaking into vans is a regular occurrence in any city. What are you going to do about these essential workers? How will they get a permit? How many hoops will they have to jump through? Nearly finished. Which leads me to the cost of these permits. Seriously, another staff tax that people have been taxed on their earnings, taxed on the car, taxed on their fuel, and now taxed to park. And it doesn't even guarantee the essential workforce can even park. Kingston Cemetery, I visit every weekend. I take my grandchildren through the cemetery. I have seen many people for hours on end staying at the gravesite of their loved ones. What are these people going to do where they park? Are they all going to park inside the cemetery? Will they fit? The flower shop on the corner is where they visit first to get their flowers to lay on the graves. That have an impact on their local business, and this business will have to purchase many parking permits because this lady has a lot of people who work in the shop. Is that fair on the local business? PCC are setting charges that are an unreasonable level. Always the workforce, always the poor. The government expect PCC that all data held and managed by PCC, unless there are specific sensitivities, for example, protecting vulnerable people, to be transparent about how you are spending our money, which is rich, considering the poorest workforce, like the carers, are the ones that are supporting the vulnerable people. Children are living with parents longer. They can't afford to get on the housing ladder, so this means there are more cars to one household. Please do not compare this to an HMO, potentially 7 cars to one house, to make a comparison, which is why children who are adults that are still living at home, hence more permits for one household. I believe that I'm informing you of extenuating and mitigating circumstances for you to reconsider to stop this parking permit in this area. And I believe PCC are not transparent and not using quality-based standards that the public understand fairly, accurately and exponentially. With so many discrepancies and not being transparent, not informing residents, all over social media you wonder why this country is the state it's in. Everyone's unhappy. Everyone believes the government is failing us. And now it seems PCC have joined that bandwagon. So many people actually don't believe a word any of you say anymore. When you joined office, I'm sure it's for the right reasons, representing the people. But some of us don't believe you now. Too much has come out of lies and cover-ups and not being transparent enough. PCC should give proper consideration and respond to my challenge and answer every question with transparency, as you have a duty to act fairly and proportionately and exercise discretion sensibly and reasonably with regard to the public interest. There should be a regular communication.
I'm going to ask you to just start drawing to a close, please.
I am. One last bit. When changes are made, because I no longer have any faith, I'll skip that bit. So I'm asking you to not proceed with this parking scheme. Actually, I do not have an alternative, as I'm only a mere minion care worker on minimum wage.
Thank you very much. I don't believe we have an Anna Hogan in the room. So I'm now going to go to Paul Newman, please. I'm going to say the same thing, sort of 5 minutes at tops, please, sir.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry if I can't read very well, but my name's Paul Newman. I've got a muscle wasting disease. My wife's my full-time carer. Good evening. Firstly, I have lived in this area for the last 48 years. Over this time, of course, we have seen the changes in amount of cars on the road. But as you can see from other areas, putting permits in place will not change the amount of parking spaces available. All permits do is burden the working class household who are already struggling with more and outgoings and debt, like our daughter who is full-time university having to pay for university fees. I am disabled. My wife is my full-time carer. If I fall over, which I do quite often because of my muscle wasting disease, I have to rely on friends or family to help me as I am a dead weight and I can't get up on my own. I'm just there. I don't want to put the NHS under more strain by phoning an ambulance to help me. I call on close friends to help. I now run the risk of not wanting to come to help me. I'll risk friends not wanting to come to help me as they may get a ticket to pay to come to help me with this happening as not a quite as easy job to get me back up. But if you could oppose not to have it, it would help me a lot because I have to rely on people to help me, which is difficult at best of times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And the last name I have down is Nigel, I'm sorry, I can't read my writing, Nancaro. Is that pronouncing it correctly?
Good evening. My name's Nigel Nancaro. I work for Pam's Artistic Florist in New Road opposite the Cemetery Gates. I expect most of you have been to our shopping. We've been there 48 years. It's a family-run business. We trade 363 days a year. We have Boxing Day and New Year's Day off. Our current working hours are 9 till 5 during the week, 9 till 4 on a Saturday, 9 till 2 on a Sunday. So the parking restrictions between 4 and 6 will affect our passing trade during that time because people will be worried about getting a ticket, etc. I did speak to the gentleman in the week, he phoned me and said there's going to be a 1 hour grace period, which, yeah, thank you, that would help. But it's not going to help the people that come in, say, at 4 o'clock to organise a funeral and can sometimes be there for 2 hours. We work a lot more hours than just the 9 till 5. So that wouldn't help some people. Totally understand it's an offer, and how you're going to police that, and I don't know. That's not for me to say, and I'd assume it would, but I think it would still put a lot of customers off stopping at our shop because of permits. Obviously, we have staff members, which we work 9 till 5. So when we looked at the list for the cost for each staff member to have a vehicle with a permit, it was astronomical. As a business, we couldn't cope with that. We looked at maybe buying them a ticket for each day, which I believe they do them, they're £1.50 or whatever. That would be more economical, but again, it's still going to hit our bottom line. Now, we have business owners. We don't live on the premises. My mother-in-law lives on the premises. She started the business 48 years ago. We live away from them. So we've got 6 staff members potentially with vehicles. Now, currently, we're very sensible where we park because of residents. We park on the opposite side of the road where the cemetery is. Try not to use people's spaces. On the occasion where we're working late, a lot of the neighbours will say, when you go, give us a shout and we'll move our vehicle. We're quite helpful on that. But if we've got 6 vehicles to buy permits for, we can't afford that. And we have a business van which we use for deliveries. Again, is that exempt, or because it's part of the premises? I mean, there's lots of confusion on what permits we would get for free and what we wouldn't, and what we'd have to pay for. Obviously, we do understand the reasons behind it in a way, and you've stated it works for the other area. All it's done is move them commercial vehicles to our area. If you go to our area now at 4 o'clock, you can't park because they're all in our area. So, okay, implement it in our area. They're going to move somewhere else. They're going to go to the next area. Then you're going to have that problem. It's just a big knock-on effect. And it's vehicles that are parked for, well, months and years that don't move. All they've done is moved them into our area from George Street.
Could I ask you just to kind of wrap up your...
Yeah, so basically our objection is mainly for custom. We've all been affected over the years with COVID and bits and pieces, and businesses are trying our best. But I'd say at least 10% of our business is passing trade after 4 o'clock. When people finish work, I'm going to grab the missus a bunch of flowers, and I think it's going to be a deterrent for them to do that. And we're worried about it affecting our business. So that's one point. Just the other point as well, I know in the report, the cemetery gates opposite us, there's a cove, and that was going to be a no parking between 9 and 5. Not 100% sure on the reason for that, because it's speaking to the gentleman, they're now going to possibly put yellow lines in there. Well, of an evening, 10 to 12 cars can park in there, and they're all gone by first thing in the morning. So that when the cemetery gates need to be open, people can get through. No one blocks the gates at all. They know that, they don't, because the ladies drive in there. The 2 ladies that work in the office can drive in there every day. But that's 8 to 10 spaces that will be gone. And I think that's not fair as well, because a lot of our customers pull in there to come over to us. And people visiting the cemetery whose families are buried this end of the cemetery.
I'm going to have to ask you
where the gates are closed, which, if you open the gates at both ends, that will solve a lot of problems. But it's just a big point. As a business, we're very, very concerned if you implement this, it's going to affect I'd say at least 10%. And that's scary in this day and age.
Okay, thank you very much for your deputation. In fact, thank you for all the deputations. There are several points that I'd respond to. Gareth, I don't know whether you want to pick up on a couple of the things about the permissions, who can get them.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, all of you, for your deputations, for taking the time to come and share those. Yeah, I mean, these are not easy questions to answer. Parking isn't an easy challenge to address. I think just to pick out a couple of points that came up. certainly take on board the point around people living in homes having sort of several cars, and that it's not always HMOs. We do mention in the report that obviously one of the reasons why there is a higher cost for the second, third vehicles is to help to reduce car ownership, but recognise that that's not going to be the case, for everybody. And likewise, when with the discussion around sort of displacing sort of parking from one place to another as well. We had that conversation on the phone. So again, thank you again for that, for the time you gave me then as well. And I think that what we found and what other places have found is that, yes, if you just have one residence parking area, then you, of course, can get that because a neighbouring street that hasn't got the restrictions can get some of the overspill. But what you do tend to find is that as you do have more of these, controlled areas with the restrictions in place, is that while there will be some examples, and you've given some great examples of where people will still need to drive, is that there's certainly those journeys that others of us might make where we do have different options, and it can help to drive that behaviour change, and that frees up then the space for the people who do need it. In terms of the sort of revenue, and I did mention it a little bit in the report, but I think it's worth just being clear as well that any surplus that's ever generated from these schemes, it has to be reinvested by law in transport schemes. It is ring-fenced. So it is just designed to be self-financing, which it has to be by law. And then I think what was the other thing I wanted to address? Yeah, just in terms of the discussion that we had around the customers for the florists as well. That's where it's great that we did hear during the consultation that could be an issue for the customers, and that's why we've made this commitment, which we've already started to undertake, to have that engagement with yourselves and neighbouring businesses. That's not it's not finalised, so we can continue to have that dialogue. It will take a few months for this, if this zone's approved, for it to be implemented anyway. So it gives us time to make sure that we're doing what we can to sort of help mitigate the impact that you're worried about. So there was a lot covered in those deputations. So I might not have responded to everything. I'm always certainly happy to have conversations outside of these meetings as well, but hopefully that's, at least addressed some of them. Thank you.
And I'll come back to a couple of points that were raised, but are there any other questions or queries? I think Councillor Heaney just got the hand in first on that one.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things about this, the zone and what it covers, just so I'm absolutely clear. The map obviously is on, I'm afraid there's a black thing on the bottom of the page, but it's 248, page 248. On the eastern side, the boundary with New Road that goes along the cemetery, is that, and it goes up to, what's it called? Burley Road. So from Burley Road to effectively Cockner Road, the New Road side, is that all in the new zone, or is any of that in the southern adjacent zone, GC?
So the map. It's hard to describe maps, isn't it? The map that we've got on the council's webpage, the residence parking zone map that shows GD and GC, that is accurate because we made very sure that we got the boundary right, and that's the same one that's in the in all the correspondence that was sent out to residents, which you've got a copy of there. I was trying to follow exactly the part that you had the question about, and I must admit that I'm struggling a little bit. So, I don't know if we need to get next to each other on the same screen.
So, can I clarify? From Burley Road to George Street, the southern part of New Road there, that is in GD zone, correct?
Yes, thank you. With Felicity's help, I've now located Burley Road. Yes, so Burley Road is in the GC zone, which is the one that was implemented in May, and then it's the area to the north of that is the GD zone that is the subject of today's decision.
So the south side of New Road is in GD zone, but the north side will be in the new zone. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And then if I go to George Street to Cotner Road, where it is the cemetery is on the south side, is any of the south side of that part of New Road in the GD zone, or is that all in the new zone, GC zone, or all in the new zone?
So when George Street ends and you get to New Road, then all of New Road is in the proposed GD zone.
Right, okay, that's really helpful. I wanted to just also clarify the recommendation 2.2. It talks about additional engagement with businesses about New Road and Northgate Avenue. I'm assuming that Northgate Avenue is the road north of New Road, which is unnamed and runs east-west, west-east. Is that correct?
It's a little tiny.
Oh, the little tiny road there. Sorry, because I was wondering about, yeah, there's a little tiny road going across there. So is the council looking at making the whole of that road short-term parking, or only part of it? What is the proposal?
So that's why we've undertaken the engagement. The florists' feedback that we received during the consultation is included both in the appendix and in the main body of the report. We didn't hear from the other businesses, but when we were looking, there were a couple of other businesses in the immediate vicinity that we thought, well, if we're going to engage with the florists, then we should do the same. I think that the neighbouring business, their opening hours are shorter, probably won't be so effective, but then there is one a little bit further along that we have tried to contact, and we'll make sure that we do manage to successfully contact before we go any further with those discussions.
But I think the answer is the council doesn't have a view yet because the TRO is proposed to get the consultation. So there's been broad-based consultation for the area, which has elicited some response, but there's now going to be a specific one about that specific piece, and which by definition, there is no view.
So I was just going to say that if this is passed today, Northlands Avenue will become part of the zone and will be restricted between 4 and 6. But the council will look at the possibility of changing that at some point. What sort of timescale are we talking about doing that within? What sort of timescale would that be?
So the aim, of course, is that if if we accept that there's a sort of merit in making some changes to the way that it would operate in that particular location, then the aim is to get it in at the same time, so that there isn't that negative impact that we're trying to avoid. So given that the typical time frame to implement this would be around March time, so that does give us enough time to have those discussions and make sure that we do get the right solution that best meets the needs of the business in that area.
Oh, right, that's helpful, because so before the implementation scheme, you would bring a new TRO if there was a requirement for one to bring in any new change, and then when it was implemented, it would implement all in one go rather than implementing the scheme and then changing it later. Right, that's okay, that's really helpful, yeah. The last question I wanted to ask was in relation to, you talk about, this is the public notice. It says a maximum of 2 resident permits per postal address would be authorised each year. A third permit may be issued to a postal address if there is sufficient capacity within the zone. How do you decide whether to issue a third permit, and how do you decide about sufficient capacity? And I was thinking specifically in relation to this area.
So ultimately, I think that sort of our colleagues in the parking team have a fairly good understanding and a good view based on civil enforcement officers' activity and so on, where there will be the higher demands and where there won't be, but ultimately that's part of the intervening period between the decision being made and the zone coming into force, is that when residents are encouraged and businesses are encouraged to apply for permits, then of course that gives us a chance to gauge what the take-up is like, and to make sure that we are getting the right, whether it's a 2 or 3 limit, getting it right for the zone in question. So there's no need for us to make that commitment at this stage when we can actually have gauge it much better closer to the time.
Thank you, Chair. My question is more around the timing of the operation. 3.5, the RPZ was proposed to operate from 4 to 6 every day, which is consistent with the neighbouring GC RPZ. Is that also 4 till 6? That is. Okay. Was that the determining factor in the reason to go with a 4 till 6? I see there's some comments under 4.4 about that, but was that one of the major determining factors in the fact that it replicated an adjacent one?
Yes, it certainly was a factor. There are various factors considered, mostly based on the insight from the informal survey. But if you were in a situation where maybe you were sort of weighing up, should it be 3:30 to 5:30 or 4:30 to 6:30, but then you had an adjacent zone that's 4 to 6, then typically, because it's not an exact science, it's better to have something that is consistent for the residents and visitors to that area, rather than them crossing a boundary and having it being half an hour different.
The reason why I'm saying, because I've seen a lot of these over my lifetime that have come forward, but what strikes me a lot about this one, and you do get a lot of people, I support it, but I want a different sort of time. But page 241, when you look at the percentage of respondents, 97% say it occurs in the evenings. And actually, if you read a lot of the a lot of the representations where they're sort of agreeing to it, but a large proportion of them are talking in terms of 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening as being a more preferential time. And that I find is unusual for these sorts of things, that there seems to be quite a strong gauge that says 4 till 6 is not going to work. It needs to be later into the evening. So I just wondered whether there was any possibility at looking at alternative timings on this. I know we review these things and come back to it, but given the fact that that's what I'm seeing here and that's what I'm picking up, I would have thought to try and get it right in the first place and maybe look at alternative times that push it later into the evening. It would certainly help the florist to a certain degree in that respect, but I appreciate that's one deputation out of an entire area, but I'm seeing that repeated time after time in the, I agree with it, but later please, later please. It seems to be coming back, and I wonder what we've taken into consideration with that sort of feedback, because after all, it's not for me, where I live, to tell people what's right or wrong. It's the people that actually live in the area that know what's going to work best for them and their businesses. And I would suggest rethinking that timing if we're going to go forward with it.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Heaney.
Give a brief comment, actually. I mean, I agree with some of the comments that come from deputation. I mean, I don't think parking problems necessarily solve the major issue, because there are too many cars in the city and it often shifts the problem elsewhere. The other thing is about the timing issue. I mean, I obviously represent a completely different area of the city in Southsea in St Jude Ward. And when I was first elected, in fact, we had a scheme called MD, which was around the King's Theatre. And the one thing I noticed when canvassing and talking to people on the doorstep, that there was a completely unclear sort of sense of what the timing should be. Some people wanted it a bit earlier, some people wanted it a bit later. And actually it was, I have to say, the thing went to Cabinet, and I went along and did a deputation in a couple of months after I was elected, and I did actually ask if they would do a formal consultation to see if people were happy with it after sort of 3-4 months. And to my slight surprise, the Cabinet agreed, and they did that. And in fact, in the end, people were happy with the timing, which is 4:30 to 6:30. They found that it worked. So these things are always a bit difficult to tell, but I think the council should be open to the possibility of thinking about the timing. I don't know what the right time is. I don't live there. I don't know that. But I do know that you need some mechanism to be able to make sure that the timing is right. I think Councillor Bush has brought up a really good point. A lot of the people seem to be saying, do make it later. Whether there's any possibility to change that now, where we are, given that we'd already consulted on a particular time, I don't know. But at least if there was a commitment that was given to properly review that within a short space of time, after it has been implemented, to see if it works, as you did with MD, not you personally, but the administration, that would, I think, be helpful.
No, it's one of those things where the majority seem to want it, but, and not to labour my point too much, but normally when I've seen these sorts of reports in the past, you can adopt a scattergun with what people want, from which 2-hour slot all the way through to 24 hours a day, please, which is sort of unsustainable, to be quite frank. But this particular one, it just strikes me that there are a number of people, they're not necessarily talking about timings, but they're basically saying 4 till 6 is too early and it needs to be pushed into the evenings. And there's an awful lot of those, and that just struck me from previous ones, that there is a consistency of, I agree, but, and they're all saying the same thing.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the deputies. Thank you also to the councillors for their questions and the officers for their comments. It now comes down to me to kind of make a decision about where we go next and whatever. Very briefly, I think there were some issues raised about social care, the remuneration to people in that kind of work. I'm afraid that's a question much larger than for this group, and I'm making a decision that's focused on transport, and I'm not really able to do anything for a specific group. No, in fact, I'm not going to go down there because that's outside the scope of this meeting. There have been you asked questions also about revenue raising, that this is another scheme by the council to raise revenue. I have to say, we would be extremely inefficient about revenue raising if we haven't put the price up since 2015. And in an absolute term, even in terms of anyone who owns a car, it is a relatively small amount. I do understand the point that money is money, and even £30 is something for a lot of people, especially those people on low wages. But I don't think this is the vehicle to be able to address that. And for the record, I do live on Portsea Island, and I do live in RPZ, and I have to pay my 30 quid to have something on the street. There were also questions raised about HMOs and parking and 7 cars. Actually, this is one of the benefits of introducing the RPZ scheme. At the moment, there is unlimited numbers of vehicles that can be attached to any one property. If the scheme is introduced, there will be a maximum of 2 permits with the possibility of a third. I think we all know the parking situation around there to expect that there will not be many third permits available to be issued. I would expect the demand to be enough from just the 2 permits side of it. So the maximum, it is likely that the maximum number of permits that will be issued per property will be 2. So that will be a reduction for some of those HMOs where perhaps people do have more than 2 vehicles. That in itself will also introduce issues for those families and those also businesses running out of there who have more than 2. And this is why transport decisions are usually a requirement to look at both sides of a coin and decide one way or the other. You're going to make some people unhappy and you're going to make some people happy. We also, okay, I've taken care of that one. There's been a good discussion, I think, a very fair discussion about the hours. To Councillor Heaney's point, I've done quite a lot of door knocking in Fratton, and because I'm involved in transport, this is one of the things I usually try and steer the conversation around to, that I found no common period which was perfect for everyone. I agree with Councillor Bosher that there is a later skew to the Fratton area. There's a lot of people who work shifts or work jobs which are not 9 till 5. However, given the proximity of the neighbouring RPZ that has already been approved, that is 4 to 6, and because I do see issues with not wanting to make people jump, and because the proposal we went with was 4 to 6, it would be a big change to make it 8 to 10 or something like that. I'm inclined to stick with what we have, but I think generally we were just recently discussing that there is a need to look at all of the time zones across all of the zones and think through whether they make sense. These schemes come up sequentially, one after a time, and after a period of time you need to have a look to see whether they all make sense next to each other. But we are not in that position to do that at this moment. So net, my experience of seeing these schemes introduced is that they do not solve the problems of a really heavily trafficked area. What they do is improve the situation. Part of that improvement is displacement. Things are moved out to less intense areas, and there aren't many of those, but there is some benefit from that. I think the deputation brought out the issue of people who leave their car static for a long period of time. Any RPZ and any set of hours, that is one of the primary benefits of doing it. They will not be able to sit there for 6 months at a time unless they're MOT'd and taxed and just left outside someone's house. But you can't just dump a vehicle there. It's got to be associated with a property that's within the zone. Given all of that, and recognising there are two sides to this debate, it is clear to me that the majority of people want this scheme brought in, of those who responded to the various consultations that we've done, and therefore I am going to approve this scheme. And notwithstanding the legitimate queries that Councillor Bosher has brought up, which I think we do need to think about, I am also going to stay with the 4 to 6 period, because I see, for me, the factor of the next door area being 4 to 6 is an important one. So net, I am going to accept the recommendation that is in front of us, both the establishment of an RPZ in the North Fratton area to be called GD Zone with a timing period of 4 to 6. The other thing that people need to recognise about what the schemes do is it is actually not so much to give you the right to park in an area or to park outside your house. It is to stop other people, force them to leave the area at that particular point in time. I do recognise that there will be losers from that decision. Okay, that is the end of item 5, and I'm now going to move us on to item number 6, which is a hopefully smaller one, which is proposed amendments to parking restrictions on Priory Crescent on Goldsmith Avenue. And I think we have a deputation there from I've lost my piece of paper, but I think it says Min Wright. From Min Wright. Please go ahead, you have about 5 minutes.
Right, my name's Min Wright, and I'm the Secretary of Milton Park Bowling Association. We have 2 clubs at Milton Park and Priory. They're both very successful clubs. Both clubs probably have about 50 plus members. We're open from April until September, so we're not there all the year. Some of our members live in Gosport, Denmead, Chichester, Hayling Island. So they obviously need to come into Portsmouth. Also, although a lot of our members are local, people like me who live in the north of the city, I drive down to play bowls, so I'm required to park my car. Both clubs play in league teams. There are 5 league teams, and from all over the Portsmouth and district area. So again, we're talking about Gosport, Leon Solent, Lee Park, Waterlooville, Denmead, Hayling Island. So people come in by car to play games of bowls. A game of bowls lasts longer than 3 hours. So it's quite difficult when they come in and when we go down to the bowls club to play bowls, as most games will take just a bit longer than 3 hours. So we actually support the 4-hour parking, because that would make it so much easier for everybody. Not only would it make it easier, a lot of people, particularly from outside, when they come in, they don't like to park there because they don't want to get a ticket. People like me often wing it, but that's beside the point. And some people have got parking tickets. So what happens is, rather than parking around Priory Crescent and Goldsmith Avenue, and it doesn't really affect any residents there because there's not houses on that side of the road. It's just a road round by the park or the side of the park. they will park in an area where there isn't a restriction, such as by Milton Park Cafe and the library, or they go down south down Winter Road where there's parking permits. So they'll try and find a place in a more of a residential area where they can park, which obviously makes it difficult. So we are actually supporting this 4-hour parking because it will help our bowlers tremendously. As I say, we're only there for about 5 months of the year, and it will stop the rest of, the cars going and really annoying people that live in the houses nearby. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you, and commendably brief. Any questions? Any comments?
Well, I was going to say, and probably a comment that I've made in the past, this is very much a local issue to a local area, and I think the deputation was very eloquent in the way they put it across. So, not that it's my decision, but I would suggest you adopt the 4 hours if it was me.
We have a deputation, a written deputation from Councillor Pitt, who represents the ward. He says he's in favour of it. I see no problem with this at all. I think it's a perfectly sensible solution to the problem.
So the good news for the deputy is I'm ultimately going to agree. However, I kind of want to make a statement that I think it is, you have some quite peculiar circumstances around both your sport and also the circumstances of the parking arrangements that makes it easier for us to accommodate this, and this is not something we're going to be able to say is a universal precedent for all other places. This is a modest amendment to a small scheme in something that we can do, and within that frame I'm happy to approve the recommendation. Richard, you are back. You have 3 left. Well, anyway, you have 3.
So hurry things along. I'll do my best, along with Kirsty, who's presenting 2 of them, and I think is less gift of the gab than me. So the first item, the item which we've come on to, is our draft public transport strategy and permission to commence public consultation on that. The cover report basically sets out the background to why we're developing a new public transport strategy. It's something which we've said we would do in our local transport plan. We believe that public transport is a sufficiently important issue for the city, given that it's used by more than 20 million journeys per year. A third of households of the cities don't have a car and therefore are quite reliant on buses, trains, taxis, ferries. It is a sufficiently important issue that we need to very clearly set out what we want to achieve in a bit more detail than what is in the LTP. So the benefits of developing a public transport strategy, a lot of this actually comes back to money, which has already been mentioned in this meeting, that if you want central government or any other future holder of the purse strings to fund your project, you need to show how individual projects or programs are part of a long-term strategy. That's what this draft public transport strategy sets out to do, setting out a 10 or so year aspiration for development of bus services, ferry services, taxis and rail. It sets out a draft vision and then under that some key threads of the types of things which we will attempt to achieve around affordability, around providing high quality infrastructure and vehicles, improving the already reasonable, in many cases, customer experience, accelerating and improving bus and rail reliability, and ultimately developing a more connected and convenient network for everyone. There's some measurable aims which have been set around numbers of users by mode by particular times, which we believe in discussion with operators and experts would be achievable. And ultimately, the appendix sets out an overview of the PT strategy. Our next proposed step, if you're happy to approve this, is to carry out a public consultation commencing early October and running to early to mid-November. This is something where we have a communications plan spanning quite a range of different kinds of media in an effort to try to get a higher response rate than some consultations which have been mentioned in this meeting already. We are planning 4 drop-in events, which because of the by-election, we're pushing back until it's literally the last day of October and early November. And we can actually add one more in if it turns out there's lots of appetite for those. They will be well publicised. And that is aiming to ensure that whilst this will be primarily done online, there'll be opportunities for people to come and talk to us face-to-face if people don't want to or are unable to respond online. So I'll wrap it up there and put it back to the chair.
So you stole my line that I was going to take about hoping for very much higher levels of engagement about this than the other one, but never mind. Do I see any questions arising from...
Trodden this path before, but I'll tread it again because it's the appropriate time, and I could have brought it up a little bit under the previous one. Page 306 talks about bus travel, which is clearly part of the major focus on this. And it sort of talks about bus network, but we're talking about slow journey times in the second paragraph, and some routes are slower than they were 20 years, etc., etc., etc. Council plans to expand bus priority measures to improve reliability. Am I correct in that what we're talking about is prioritising traffic lights and signals and stuff like that so that buses on existing routes can move quicker through the city?
That's certainly one of the forms of bus priority and one which we are currently working to roll out.
What's the other form then?
There are other forms which include bus lanes, and I think that the chair can see where this is going. There are also other forms of bus priority, such as providing access for buses only into certain areas. I think that it's recognised some of these may be controversial, but we have to recognise the large number of users of buses.
That to me strikes a lot like PCC are going to do the investment on the roads infrastructure to benefit the bus companies. And that's fine. If they're moving through the city, then that's it. What about adding additional routes to the bus network? Are there any proposals to do that? I.e., are we going to get Stage and First to stick their hands in their pockets to put more routes in?
I'll take that one maybe. I'm afraid that's a crystal ball question. So as you will know, some routes are subsidised, some routes are currently commercial, and some routes are currently subsidised, and we hope they move towards being commercial. Depending on how all of that goes, will depend how much money is available to look at new routes. I think there are lots of new routes that I would like to be seeing, but at the moment we don't have the money for them. The second factor in the crystal ball, which I'm afraid at this point in time is unknowable to me, is what the impact of devolution, LGR and general government subsidy will be. At the start of this year, the single capped bus fare went from £2 to £3, and that had a knock-on effect on the system. So there are some things that we can control and some things that we don't. In general, most of the investment around this is actually not coming directly from Portsmouth. It's coming, Portsmouth makes its contribution, but it's coming through general taxation and the central government. So who is actually paying for the bus lanes, I think, were that to be something that came out from the consultation, is something that we just don't know.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that it seems that it's going to be the taxpayer that's going to be funding the infrastructure so that the buses can move quicker, however you want to class the taxpayer. But it's not the bus companies that are, the bus companies will benefit, but they want to put, they should be, in my view, be looking at other strategic routes. You could factor this into this report or the earlier report. And I will give you two simple examples if I can, because it talks about connectivity with Waterlooville and Havant. So let's take Havant as an example. They've got the major bus depot there which connects the station, which is great. But anybody that wants to go from Havant, and I include, and you can take that through Bedhampton, Drayton and Farlington, that wants to go to QA Hospital, can't, because there's no bus route to QA Hospital. You're asking people to go to the Cossam interchange, go over the bridge and cross, and then go back up to QA. Now, a lot of those people, by the nature of the fact that they are going to hospital, probably aren't going to be able to do that journey without a direct bus route. It's something I've mentioned before, and I would have thought if we're talking about strategic bus travel, and also for those people that work at QA, that something like that would have been something that I would have said, let's get the bus companies to physically have a look at it. I've asked this question before, and the response from Stagecoach was, oh, it'll impact on our timings across the rest of the city. But they don't have a timing schedule. They have a bus every 10 minutes policy, so I can't see how that's going to impact on it. It's a red herring, as in we don't want to spend money on that route, to my mind. The other aspect of it, and again you can take Havant and where I live in Drayton and Farlington and whatever, if I wanted to go down to Eastney, the seafront, Albert Road or wherever like that, there is no bus. The only bus that goes there is the number 21, and it goes down a bit of the Eastern Road, and then it turns into Anchorage Park, works its way all the way through the city to the city centre through Lake Road. So all that whole southeast corner of the city is not viable for anybody that wants to actually go down to the seafront or that area. You've only got two choices, effectively. One of them is to get in your own car and drive, and that's what we're trying to stop, by all that respect. Or the alternative is to get a taxi. Now, I would defy anybody that lives in Drayton and Farlington to go to Aqua or whatever they call themselves now and try and book a taxi that's going to take them into the city centre. They're happy if you jump in them to come out of the city because they have no choice, but I cannot physically book a taxi to come into the city centre. More often than not, they either don't turn up or you end up with the taxi being cancelled on you because they just physically don't like coming out of the city to the outskirts of Drayton and Farlington and then going back into the city again because they'll only get the charge for one way, effectively. So I'd like to think, and I've got digressed into taxis there, but you could argue that with the taxi company, that when we're looking at the bus travel bit, let's start talking to the bus operators and saying, we need some alternative routes to move us around the city. Because, I mean, you think about match days at Fratton Park. The Eastern Road is gridlocked because everybody's driving there. If you had a bloody bus that you could actually get that would take you all the way down to that neck of the woods, I'm sure it would get used. All right, I'll fall off my soapbox in a minute. Perhaps somebody would like to come back on that.
No, I was liking you up in your soapbox, Councillor Bosher, because I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think...
I've just given two examples from my own perspective that if I could walk down the corner from where I live to get a bus to go to QA Hospital, but it'll take me 80% of the way there, and then I've literally got to walk up the hill to get to the hospital. It's not downhill, it's uphill. Or if I go to the Cossam interchange, I've then got to use that footbridge to get to the other side to get a bus to go back the other way. And it just doesn't make sense if you look at it specifically from that point of view.
So, Councillor Bosher, I absolutely agree. And if you look into the report, you know, the aspiration to go beyond the current 12 million and to reach 15 million, it's definitely got to include enhancements to the breadth of the bus network, because that's what brings the people, makes them viable alternatives for people to have in their heads and use on a regular basis. I think there are lots of specific things that we should be doing. Once again, it comes down to money. Has anyone who has seen me in various embarrassing photos over the last 18 months will know I'm a big fan of buses. In a place like Portsmouth, which is such a compact and crowded city, it is the perfect place to be doing more and more stuff on buses. It is a question about how much money we have to invest on that. So under the current scheme where we have the BSIP money, we have been able to extend the number of a number of routes. So the number 18 now goes to Clarence Pier. The frequency has been increased from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. We've now got a bus that at least goes to Ocean Park. But your fundamental challenge, that there are still parts of the city that are poorly served and there are acute moments which could be better served, I think stands entirely true. I was going to talk about DDRT, but I think that's not appropriate at the moment. I'm going to put that to one side. So I think the aspiration is there, and I think what we would hope, the purpose of driving this through is the consultation, and then hopefully driving up the number of local residents who respond to it, is to identify where are those patches of underserved need, what are the occasions where we need to do something better. Some of them, frankly, I suspect people in this room could already write. There will be other ones that will emerge, and we'll get some kind of feeling as to what the priorities are around those. Councillor Heaney. Councillor Bishop.
I think my point on that one is that paragraph about bus travel is really all about us improving the infrastructure so that the existing bus services can get to their destinations quicker. It doesn't talk about expanding the routes to make the city more accessible, and it might be better to have reworded or added something to that reflects that.
I'm going to go to Richard and then Councillor Heaney.
So without wishing to go all technical transport planner on you, provision of infrastructure which accelerates existing bus routes can, for example, mean that operators don't need as many buses to operate a service at the current headway. So, for example, take a route such as the 23, which you've referred to. The 23 currently needs something in the order of 18 vehicles to operate end-to-end at the moment. Therefore, if you could knock 5 or 10 minutes out of the end-to-end running time of that service, you might be able to operate it with 15 or 16 vehicles. The cost of operating that route then comes down to the operator, and it enables them then to be able to take more commercial risks and invest those vehicles released into some of the other areas which they currently can't. So that is one of the primary commercial reasons why the operators are keen on priority on existing routes, is because it improves the commercials, which then enables them to take greater commercial risks elsewhere, and it frees up resources to do so.
Councillor Bosch, then, because I think he's coming back on this same point.
Perhaps I'm being a little bit cynical here, but if we improve the infrastructure so that let's take your example, if they currently got 18 buses, and if I go from my house to South Parade Pier, which is where it stops, that's the thick end of almost an hour on a bus. And even then, I prefer to go to Eastleigh, so I've got to walk the rest of it because there is no bus service there. But if that says 18 buses becomes 15 buses, what's going to incentivise Stagecoach to actually say, oh, we can use those 3 buses elsewhere, or think, oh, we'll take that cost saving because it goes into our profit margin?
So I think I'm going to...
I would like to see that paragraph perhaps made a little bit more explicit about adding routes where necessary, where required, whatever you want to call it.
And I think I made the same note. I think that the technical truth is one thing, but I think for people's understanding about what the aspiration is and getting engaged, I think that's actually a very good comment. And if we can make that change.
So this is a very much a summarised version to try to make it as accessible as possible so that we don't deter consultation responses. There is what I term the full fat version, the draft final strategy, which has more detail, such as what you've mentioned around gaps in the network.
I think we will talk outside of this, but I think one extra sentence could help address some of that, and I think that would be a good thing to do. So I'd like to at least have a look at that. Councillor Heaney.
Well, because this is a permission to consult report, I'm not actually going to go into detail about particular aspects of the thing, because that is what I will try and do, obviously, and with colleagues, etc., as the thing is consulted on. But I think that there are some points that I think I agree with Councillor Bosher on. I think the problem we've got, I mean, we've got a bus partnership, and I don't know how easy that makes it to work more collaboratively with the bus companies about how you do that. But there is a bit of a tension between companies that are basically set up to make private profit and public service. You know, there is a bit of a tension there. But we have the system we have, and unless we make some fundamental changes to it, I suspect we're going to have to provide some sort of subsidy to bus companies to provide things that they feel they can't provide. The problem we have is we have to make sure that they don't therefore just use it as an opportunity to make more money out of the services they run and then leave us with picking up the things they don't want to do. But that's also partly to do with the way legislation was set up when buses were privatised and the ability to cross-subsidise, etc. But yeah, I'm going to stick with the not saying any detail. And I think we will get many more detailed comments about specific things that people want to include, and I'll be interested to see how that gets incorporated. I think that's when I'll make my comments on the document when it comes back.
Okay. And I think that was actually a correct comment, because I'm going to echo Councillor Heaney on this. So I think you raised some very valid points, and I think there is a need to look at buses strategically, which very much includes the commercial basis on which they are done. Portsmouth last year won an award in the National Bus Awards with enhanced partnership. So I think my statement would be that it is working reasonably well within the framework that it was set up when it was set up. Is there an opportunity to go even further and have a super enhanced partnership? Yes, I believe there is, which would include much more partnership working in terms of open book, understanding what the economics are, working together to increase the total bus totality. And there will be a pound, shillings and pence implication about what money is available to do that. And we will have to see where that one goes. But the purpose of this report is to give permission to go out and ask the good citizens of Portsmouth what they would like to see in their public transport. And I think that's really important for us to do before we start to lose some control over our agenda through both the devolution and ultimately the LGR. I won't take it further than that. I think it's always good to get residents' perspective in on this, and I think this will be something that gets quite a lot of, I hope it will get a lot of responses from people. I think also I appreciate that we've taken quite a broad definition of what public transport is. So it's more than buses. It's also including things like the ferries. We've even included the taxis, who occasionally are uncertain whether they like to be included or not included in the public transport sphere. But I think the way that Councillor Bosher explained how people think about getting from A to B, to whether they're using a shared vehicle, not their own, to move around, and the scale of the number of taxi trips that are taken already suggests that it is valuable to get some input and insight on that. So on that basis, if there are no more comments, I'm happy to take the report and to move forward with the consultation. Okay, Kirsty, could you now take us through the LTP4 monitoring plan, and then we shall come back to you for the implementation plan. But first, the monitoring plan.
Oh, sorry. Cool. Apologies. So this annual monitoring report is covering the period of 2024-25. It provides updates on progress towards the vision and 4 strategic objectives identified in the Local Transport Plan 4, LTP4, over the 2024-25 year. Updates on progress are detailed under the main strategic objectives under which they fall, with the strategic objectives being deliver cleaner air, prioritise walking and cycling, transform public transport and support business and protect our assets. Annual monitoring reports, or AMRs, will be produced over the life of the transport strategy to monitor and evaluate the delivery of the strategy and implementation plan. A more detailed AMR will be produced at the end of each implementation plan period of 3 years to additionally present a range of data and information for the 16 key performance indicators identified in the implementation plan. So a shorter highlight report detailing key activities in the preceding year is produced for each of those 2 interim years. But this third AMR is a full, much more detailed report, so it's providing, as well as the updates on last year and what's taken place in 2024-25, it's also providing updates on 16 key performance indicators across the first 3 years of LTP4, from 2021-22 to 2023-24. In cases where data is only available by calendar year, it's provided for the 2022 to 2024 calendar years. So this is obviously our first full AMR, so it's a first kind of big group of data that we can use within each 3-year period. We'll then go back and be able to compare to the previous year's large report and compare the monitoring from that. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, I'm happy to note the report as submitted. It is very long and comprehensive, and I'm not sure that much value is going to be given from exploring that in a public venue. If people would like to ask questions or have issues about it, the information can certainly be made available to them. And I think it is also the basis, the bedrock from which the next... so I'm going to accept that report, note that report, and then move to the last item on the agenda, which is the forward-looking version, which is the LTP4 implementation plan for 25-26 through to 27-28. And Kirsty, you have the floor again.
Thank you. So the transport strategy covers the period, as you say, 2021 to 2038, with the implementation plan being updated every 3 years across the period. The first implementation plan covered the period of 2022-23 to 2024-25 and has now ended. An updated implementation plan has been produced to cover the next 3-year period of 2025-26 to 2027-28, as well as setting out an indicative plan up to 2038. Whilst the updated implementation plan largely follows the same format as the first plan, a significant refresh has taken place to reflect important updates. So key updates include the funding section. This has been updated to reflect the current and anticipated future funding opportunities over the next 3 years, detailing both external funding sources and internal funding allocations. The list of schemes proposed to be delivered during the second 3-year period, subject to resources, has also been updated. There's quite a detailed list of schemes has now been included. Schemes have been grouped according to the main strategic objectives that they will help to deliver, although it is recognised that there is overlap with many schemes and initiatives supporting more than one objectives. A separate table is also included which shows potential schemes expected to be delivered over the longer term. So this new implementation plan will be covering years 4, 5 and 6 of the transport strategy, and the report seeks approval from Cabinet for the new updated LTP4 implementation plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bosher, you...
I've just got one, and it sort of relates to this. But we had a presentation recently on the indicators for assessing whether a scheme would go ahead. And one of those was delivering cleaner air, I believe, which sort of is reflected in scheme prioritisation here. How do you determine where a scheme is or is not going to deliver cleaner air? How do you work that out?
I think a lot of the schemes within the implementation plan, we are aware that they do cover several of the objectives. So it's which one they would sit more closely with and align more closely with.
bit of a loaded question, really, because obviously if you're going to deliver cleaner air, it's sort of determined by the monitoring stations that you're actually having that's monitoring the air. And I think one in the previous identified that there was one that is not meeting target. I'm perhaps looking predominantly at the north of the city and perhaps asking that if schemes are going to get judged on one of the categories that they do, and safety is one of them, and I can't remember what the other one is, but there were 3 of them, and one of them is cleaner air, how in Drayton, Farlington, Cossam and Paulsgrove are you going to judge whether it is going to have an impact on air quality, a positive impact on air quality, when essentially there is only one monitoring station at the Spur Road roundabout?
Bethan.
There are 233 diffusion tube monitoring stations across the city, so there will be more than one up there. The Spur Road roundabout in particular is a revoked AQMA, which is an air quality management area. So there will be there are monitoring diffusion tubes there because it's a congestion hotspot, but there will be other ones around the city as well. They're maintained by regulatory services, largely funded through the Clean Air Zone, which of course is one of our programmes. In terms of how can we judge whether or not something's going to deliver cleaner air, this is largely done on the basis of proxies and common sense assumptions that, for example, we know that traffic is 50% responsible for emissions. We're not responsible for everything, but if you're reducing vehicle movements, then by you're actively tackling the air quality objectives that we have to meet, and one of the ways in which we've done that is through the Clean Air Zone. If you're encouraging mode shift, you're effectively promoting cleaner air. So there's a figure, don't quote me, but one bus full of people has a potential to take, is it something like? No. It's it's trying to make the point that by the LTP objectives are all about promoting mode shift, active travel, promoting passenger transport. We're effectively seeking to reduce independent private vehicle movements, and mass transport in the form of a bus will take those vehicles off the road. Therefore, the emissions are lower.
I guess I'm moving more into air quality monitoring stations, and the reason I went down that route is because I've already had a conversation with Richard Lee about them, as you can probably, and I've known Richard for longer than most people have been alive, actually, known him since he was a teenager. But when it came down to those areas of the city, he was of the opinion that there aren't any as such in the north of the city there anyway. So I'm just waiting for some more clarification on that one, but I'd be interested to know.
I think there are different sorts of air monitoring units as well, and there is a spread of them, and not unreasonably they are focused in the places where it is reasonable from all scientific evidence to expect those air quality issues to be greatest. One of the joys of Drayton and Farlington is that it is further away from the main city centre, enjoys quite decent breeze quite often, and if I was a betting man, that wouldn't be the first place that I would be putting a potentially limited stock of air quality monitoring things. And I think we have to, just take sometimes a reasonable assumption. So I think. But I think that is exactly the way we should be doing it. Where there is good reason to do a particular spot and there is a justification for doing it, that is where I would think that we would be either moving to or looking to gain additional sighting of monitors if there is a reason to do it. The city changes. I've got something to talk to you after the end of this meeting to reflect the way that traffic and industry moves around the city, and we need to stay up with that. Any other questions, comments? Any more questions? We're still on questions.
Yeah, questions. It's just to get some clarification. Starting on page 449, we have the sort of table showing funding with various symbols. I just wanted to clarify just a couple of points. The very first one talks about communications, behaviour change, campaigns and events, and it says funded by a third party, and then it says not funded. I'm assuming that's because we don't actually know whether there's going to be any funding provided by the third parties, rather than that there's never going to be any funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
That's good. So then moving on to our own ones, where we have a couple of examples. We talk about page 4450, talking about promoting sustainable travel options for city events, integrating connectivity, part funded this year, not funded in previous years. We also have one on active Pompey neighbourhoods. Now, I suppose that is partly a question of whether are there any schemes being developed in the background, you know, that haven't yet got to funding stage, or is there no funding, or is it not funded because we won't fund it until we've got a scheme? I suppose is the question there. So I suppose those are the two things there. Not funded, presumably it's waiting on the budget to be agreed. Is that right for those two? 26, 27, 27, 28. It's not that we're not funding them, it's just we haven't got an agreed budget for them yet. Or maybe a scheme in the case of the APN, yeah. If that's clear.
Is someone going to speak, or I'm sorry, I can't see whether you're indicating you're going to want to speak or not. Richard.
So on this table, taking a step back, there are over 20 pages earlier in this document about the cocktail of different funding sources and opportunities and timescales which we have to work to. We receive numerous different pots of money for different modes of transport across different time periods, primarily from central government. We have some funding which is discretionary, not much in the greater scheme of things, but the LTP capital funding is the main discretionary source, and that then has to be spread quite thinly. But essentially, this table, anything which has got a star, full black star with a green area saying it's fully funded, it's something where we feel that we have a reasonable level of funding to deliver that project over the 3 years this implementation plan covers. However, then if it's a glass half full, half a star, or empty, it's either that there is no funding at all or insufficient funding to deliver a viable project, essentially. So I think in the case of active Pompey neighbourhoods, there is a small amount, there is an allocation indicatively from the LTP capital budget, but currently it wouldn't be enough, as far as I understand it, to deliver a viable APN scheme.
But I think the other question that you asked at some point was, is there kind of like a rack of schemes that we would like to do? There is, I'm seeing activity from the back row. Richard?
Absolutely there is. So we have, it's more than 300 requested schemes in our feasibility list. Bethan might know the exact number, but I want to say it's around 370 or so. Ultimately, I would say that we don't have a shortage of opportunities. What constrains us is manpower, funding, and the ability to, given the city's road network, do too many things at once.
Yeah, I thought the question was more about specific area schemes, which is fortunately a smaller number than 300 and anything, but is still a much larger number than we have the capacity to deal with at the moment. But we're always looking to see whether we can obtain funds to do that, and that is a little bit unknowable. I think, I don't want to go into it again, but you know, the devolution and or even LGR will have impacts around these things. So as we start to go out into that future, I think there possibly also being a shading overload about the clarity with which we can see column 1, the year that we're in, bit more clearly, or less clearly into the subsequent one, and 2-3 years out it becomes quite murky, but there's an indication about where we think we sit at the moment. Okay, any more questions or comments? So essentially this LTP4 implementation plan is really, it's the continuation of what we've been doing so far. There is no major change in strategy or approach. I think it's a sensible plan from where we are at the moment, and I am therefore happy to accept the report as it sits. And with that, I'm going to close the meeting at just before 6:30 p.m. and thank everyone for their contributions.